Hi, my name is Dr. Catherine Hughes from Crime Psych, and I'm a criminal psychologist. I've done a number of these psychological analysis videos before where I draw on research findings to give an informed opinion of what an offender's behaviour can reveal about their psychology. Therefore, this isn't a diagnosis. In this particular video, I'm going to be discussing Robert Napper. In all of my videos that I do try to focus more on the psychology of the behaviour rather than the behaviour itself. However, it is sometimes necessary to include some details. Therefore, this video contains some details of rape and murder. I'm going to give you a very brief overview of the case and of the offender, then talk about the upbringing and childhood of the offender on what information is available, at least anyway. Then I'll discuss the behaviours during the crime that reveal psychological aspects of the offender, as well as any psychiatric or mental illnesses that they've been diagnosed with. If you do want to learn more about the psychology of crime or profiling or criminal behaviour, there are a range of courses available online via my website, and I will put a link to that in the video description. You get a certificate with all of these. Some of them are free and others come with a money back guarantee. Robert Napper is a British murderer and rapist. He was born on the 25th of February 1966. He was convicted of 2 murders, 1 manslaughter, 2 rapes and 2 attempted rapes. He was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia as well as Asperger's syndrome, and he was sentenced to be detained at Broadmoor Hospital indefinitely in December 2008. If you saw the video that I put up on Tuesday, you will have heard this man's name already. Rachel J Nichol was a British woman who was one of Napper's murder victims. She was murdered on Wimbledon Common in southwest London in 1992. On the morning of the 15th of July, she and her then 2-year-old son were walking the family's dog on Wimbledon Common. Whilst they were passing through a secluded area of the common, Nichol was attacked by an assailant who sexually assaulted her and murdered her by repeatedly stabbing and slashing her with a knife. A psychologist, Paul Britton, was asked to create a character portrait of the kind of individual who would have committed that crime. Britton gave the police a description of the man that they should be looking for. Britton proposed that he would be sexually repressed, he would be a loner who lived on his own close to the crime scene. He would be in his 20s or 30s with an interest in the occult and in knives. Detectives knocked on doors around Wimbledon Common and questioned 32 men. They produced a photo fit which 4 callers identified as a Mr. Colin Stagg, who often walked his dog on the common. Colin Stagg was 29, unemployed, a virgin and a pagan. A woman with whom he'd corresponded with via a Lonely Hearts column contacted the police to say that he'd shared graphic sexual fantasies with her. And a witness had picked him out of an identity parade as well. He didn't have any previous convictions, but he told police that he did sometimes sunbathe naked on the heathland. The police then became convinced that they'd found the man that they were looking for. They decided that Stagg fitted the profile, and they asked the psychologist to assist in designing a covert operation to see whether Stagg would implicate or eliminate himself from their inquiries. That operation was later quite heavily criticised by the media and the judge, as it was in effect a honey trap. On the 18th of December 2008, Napper was convicted of the manslaughter of Nichol on the grounds of diminished responsibility. He also admitted to 4 other attacks on women. Napper was sentenced to be incarcerated indefinitely at Broadmoor Hospital for the criminally insane. Robert Napper is the eldest child of Brian and Pauline. His parents' marriage was turbulent and Napper witnessed violent attacks on his mother. They divorced when Robert was 9 years old. Mrs. Napper's health deteriorated after the marriage breakup, and all of her children spent periods in foster homes. Robert underwent psychiatric treatment. The psychiatric counselling Napper had lasted for 6 years. Napper was very socially awkward at school, and he found it very difficult to get along with the other children. School friends say that he was despised at school. It was later established that he had undiagnosed Asperger's syndrome, which would have accounted for this awkward behaviour. Robert played truant and he shoplifted. He was deeply damaged when he was sexually assaulted by a family friend on a camping trip at just 12 years old. The offender was jailed, but Napper became very introverted, obsessively tidy and very reclusive. His mother said that he hardly came out of his bedroom, and when he did, it was to bully his siblings or to spy on his sister while she was naked. From an early age, he's been subjected to a fairly dysfunctional life. His first experiences of relationship were his father hitting his mother. Not having a stable family life can have severe consequences on a child. The abuse and neglect caused dysfunctional thoughts and behaviours to develop as coping strategies in Napper. Robert Napper first came to the attention of police in 1986 when he was just 20 years old. He was arrested for being in possession of an air gun. He was just given a fine for that and a conditional discharge by the police. He confessed to his mother that he'd raped a woman on Plumstead Common. His mother, of course, immediately phoned the local police to let them know, but they said they couldn't find any record of a rape on the Common, and so they never pursued the inquiry any further. However, only 8 weeks prior to this, a 31-year-old woman reported to the police that she'd been raped in her home in front of her children. He'd entered the house through the rear door and he was armed with a Stanley knife and wearing a black mask. That woman's house backed on to Plumstead Common. The police had recorded this crime and they'd interviewed the woman. They also collected DNA samples from her. The frustrating thing is that if the police had have checked their databases properly, they would have been able to match the two reports, get DNA evidence from Napper and ending his offending then. I think the most likely explanation for his behaviour was that he was hurting others because he was hurting himself. It was after that incident that Napper's mother broke off all contact with him. He moved into a bedsit and he had several low-paid jobs. Over a 2-month period in 1992, 3 women were assaulted along the Green Chain Walk, 2 17-year-old girls in March, and on the May bank holiday weekend, a young attractive 22-year-old blonde woman was attacked. She was pushing her 2-year-old in a pram on her way to a barbecue. As she walked past a derelict building, Napper jumped out on her and attacked her from behind. He'd placed a rope around her neck whilst forcing her to the ground. He stripped her and then raped her and battered her in front of her young child. Reports say that she was left looking like a bloody rag doll. Napper is believed to have been the Green Chain rapist who carried out at least 70 savage attacks across South East London over a 4-year period, which ended in 1994. The earliest of these Green Chain rapes have been linked to Napper and he's admitted to them. He's known to have kept detailed records of the sites of potential and actual attacks on women. After a staggering 86 complaints filed, Napper moved to another part of London. Napper had initially been eliminated from police inquiries because of his height. Most witnesses said that the offender was around 5'7", so anyone who was over 6 foot was then eliminated. Napper was 6'2". However, there are conflicting witness reports of the rapist's height, and Napper also walked with a bit of a stoop. 7 weeks after the attack on the young blonde mother, another young blonde mother in her early 20s was walking on a summer's morning with her 2-year-old on Wimbledon Common. Police have said that he might have picked her out because having a child made her more vulnerable. Napper stabbed J Nichol 49 times in front of her son Alex. He clung to his mother's body, begging her to wake up. Although he left his bloody fingerprints in the flat of the first woman he attacked, it wasn't until May 1994 that they were traced back to him. By then, he'd been arrested and discharged for shoplifting sweets. Soon after, Colin Stagg was incorrectly charged with the J Nichol murder. Napper killed Samantha Bissett, aged 27, and her 4-year-old daughter Jasmine. They lived near his home in Plumstead, South East London, and Napper had been stalking them before killing them. As I said earlier, he was diagnosed with schizophrenia and also suffered from Asperger's syndrome. He was an obsessive peeping Tom, and he kept notes on the women that he stalked and he fantasised over. He was suspected of spying on Miss Bissett and her boyfriend before climbing into the basement flat. He assaulted her and stabbed her 8 times in the neck in the hallway before sexually assaulting her and suffocating her very young daughter. He then dragged Miss Bissett's body into the living room where he mutilated her. The attack on her was so brutal that the police photographer who recorded the crime scene ended up being off sick for 2 years. Perhaps the schizophrenia had developed as a result of being traumatised, as a sort of way of escaping the pain that he felt. Again, that's most likely a case of him hurting other people and attacking other people because he was hurting and he wanted to hurt them in the same way. Being sexually assaulted was most likely his first sexual experience. There are many others who have been abused that do go on to become abusers themselves. As with many violent serial offenders, we do see a progression in the level of violence that they use. He started by peeping on his sister, bullying his brothers, then onto assaulting young women, and then eventually to rape, mutilation and murder. Unfortunately, there were at least 7 opportunities that were missed by the police in this investigation. Firstly, his mother had reported him saying that he'd raped someone, but they couldn't link it to a report of a rape in the area. Because of this, they never took a DNA sample from him at the time. On the 18th of December 2008, Napa was convicted of the manslaughter of Rachel Nichol on the grounds of diminished responsibility. He also admitted to 4 other attacks on women. He was sentenced to be held at Broadmoor Hospital indefinitely. In 1992, he attempts to rape 2 women and rapes another. The EFIT was issued, but he'd already killed Rachel Nichol by that time. A neighbour had called to say that it looked like Napa, so he was asked to give a saliva sample. He failed to turn up twice and the police didn't follow it up. Another person rang to report the likeness of the EFIT, but he was eliminated because he was over 6 foot. When he was arrested for having a firearm, police found an A to Z with the location of the attacks marked out on it, but he was only charged with the firearm offence. In 1993, he was seen climbing over a wall of a young mother's house, but convinced officers that he was simply out walking. Later that year, a gun is found buried on the common in Plumstead with Napa's fingerprints on, but the police didn't do anything. And finally, a DNA test showed no match to Napa. However, 3 years later, it was found to be faulty and was then matched to Napa. Napa was already in prison for killing Samantha and her daughter Jasmine when he was convicted of Rachel Nichol's murder. In conclusion, Robert Napa had a very difficult start in life and he grew up in a home where domestic violence was commonplace. Because of his mother's ill health, he and his siblings spent time at foster homes. He had undiagnosed Asperger's syndrome, which would have made social interactions very difficult for him. He became very reclusive and then began peeping. This progressed onto assault, rape and eventually murder. I do hope that you found today's video interesting. More importantly, that you've learned something new from it. Thanks for watching then. Bye for now.